We're incredibly grateful for your support. Before we begin today's tale, tell us, which city or country are you joining us from? We love connecting with our global audience. Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Bonds of Blood and Duty. Jackson Wade possessed the kind of loyalty that ran bone deep. Born in a small Montana town to a rancher father and schoolteacher mother, he learned early that your word was your bond. His grandfather, a Vietnam veteran, had instilled in him a sense of duty that eventually led him to the Navy SEALs at 22. The only thing worse than an enemy is a traitor, his grandfather would say. Jackson took those words to heart during his 15 years of distinguished service. When Jackson met Veronica Blackwood at a charity gala for veterans in San Diego, he was 35 and recently promoted to lieutenant commander. Veronica, with her captivating green eyes and disarming smile, seemed genuinely interested in veterans' affairs. The daughter of a wealthy hotel magnate from Connecticut, she'd moved west to establish herself away from her father's shadow. "I've always admired people who risk their lives for others," she told Jackson that night, her fingers lingering on his arm. "There's something powerful about that kind of sacrifice." 3 dates later, Jackson knew he was falling hard. Veronica's intelligence matched her beauty, and her apparent support for his military career seemed genuine. 6 months into their relationship, Jackson introduced her to his SEAL team during a rare shore leave barbecue. "You found yourself a keeper, Wade," remarked his closest teammate, Riley Dawson. "She actually listens when we talk about deployments." Most civilians' eyes glaze over. Riley, a communications specialist from Louisiana with a wickedly sharp sense of humor, had been with Jackson through 3 tours. Their bond was forged through firefights and long nights of surveillance in hostile territory. If Riley approved of Veronica, that meant something. After a year of dating, Jackson proposed during a sunset hike overlooking the Pacific. Veronica accepted with tears and enthusiasm that seemed entirely genuine. They married 2 months later in a ceremony attended by Jackson's team and Veronica's small circle of fashionable friends. "You've made me the happiest man alive," Jackson told her during their first dance. She looked up at him with those emerald eyes. "This is just the beginning of our adventure." Life settled into a comfortable rhythm when they weren't separated by deployments. They purchased a beautiful home in an upscale San Diego neighborhood with views of the ocean. Veronica decorated it exquisitely, seemingly building them a perfect life for his returns from missions. Admiral Frank Garrison, Jackson's commanding officer and longtime mentor, pulled him aside at their housewarming party. "You've done well for yourself, son," he said, whiskey in hand as they stood on the back deck. "Not many in our line of work find this kind of stability." Jackson nodded. "I'm grateful every day, sir." "Just remember," the Admiral said, his weathered face serious in the fading light, "in our world, compartmentalization is key. Some things from the field should never follow you home." Jackson assumed the Admiral was giving standard advice about separating work from home life. Later, he would remember this conversation differently. During their 2nd year of marriage, Veronica began managing their finances, insisting Jackson focus on his dangerous work rather than mundane matters. She also suggested increasing his life insurance policy to $2 million. "With the risks you take, we should be prepared," she explained. "God forbid anything happens to you, but if it did," Jackson agreed, touched by her practical concern for their future. Around this time, Veronica befriended Damon Reeves, a finance consultant who had recently moved into their neighborhood. Tall and polished with a Yale education, Damon quickly became a regular fixture at their dinner parties. "Damon's helping me understand investment strategies," Veronica explained when Jackson noticed their increasing interaction. "Since you're gone so much, it's good to have a friend who understands money matters." 5 months before Jackson's deployment to Iraq, strange inconsistencies began appearing. Text messages that Veronica quickly hid when he entered the room. Unexplained absences she attributed to spa days or shopping trips. Bank withdrawals she vaguely explained as investment opportunities. Riley noticed changes during his visits. "Veronica seems different," he commented during a workout. "Everything good with you, too?" "Just deployment stress," Jackson replied, unwilling to voice his growing unease. 2 weeks before his Iraq deployment, Jackson returned home early from training to find Damon's car in his driveway. Entering quietly through the back door, he heard hushed voices from his study. He paused in the hallway, listening. Once he's gone, the waiting begins, Damon was saying. These things require patience. I've waited 2 years already, Veronica replied, her voice colder than Jackson had ever heard it. This deployment is the perfect opportunity. Jackson stepped back, mind racing. Were they discussing some surprise for his return? An investment opportunity? He nearly confronted them, but something in their tone made him hesitate. Instead, he silently left the house and drove to Riley's apartment. I need you to keep an eye on something while I'm gone, he told his friend that night. Riley didn't ask questions. That was their way. Consider it done, was all he said. When Jackson left for Iraq, Veronica's goodbye was passionate and tearful. To anyone watching, she appeared the devoted military wife, already counting days until her husband's return. Come back to me, she whispered in his ear during their embrace. Jackson nodded, but a chill had settled in his chest. Those words sounded less like a plea and more like something else entirely. Always, he promised, wondering if he was imagining the subtle shift in their relationship or if something truly sinister was unfolding. Chapter 2: Shadows in the Sand. The Iraqi sun bore down mercilessly as Jackson led his team through yet another patrol in Anbar province. 3 months into his deployment, the routine had become almost mechanical. Sweep for insurgents, meet with local assets, gather intelligence, avoid IEDs. But today something fell off. Wade, command wants you back at base ASP, crackled his radio. Priority Alpha. Jackson exchanged glances with his teammate Luis Valenzuela, a former street kid from Chicago whose intuition for danger had saved their lives more than once. You piss off the brass? Luis asked, squinting against the sun. Not that I'm aware of, Jackson replied, signaling for the team to head back to their vehicles. At base, Jackson was directed not to the operations center, but to a nondescript trailer at the compound's edge. Inside sat Admiral Garrison and 2 men in civilian clothes. Lieutenant Commander Wade, the Admiral said, his face grave. This is Agent Conrad Lambert and Agent Trevor Wilson, Naval Criminal Investigative Service. Jackson felt his stomach drop. NCIS involvement meant serious trouble. Sir, he acknowledged, remaining at attention. At ease, son, Garrison said. You want to sit down for this? Agent Lambert, a heavy-set man with calculating eyes, opened a folder. Your wife has been in contact with known criminal elements in San Diego, specifically individuals connected to contract killings. The world tilted beneath Jackson's feet. There must be some mistake. No mistake, said Wilson, sliding photos across the table. These were taken 2 weeks ago. The images showed Veronica meeting with a hard-faced man in a San Diego park. Money changed hands. We've been monitoring a hitman named Viktor Kozlov, Lambert continued. Russian immigrant, ex-Spetsnaz, responsible for at least 7 confirmed contract killings. Your wife contacted him through an intermediary, Damon Reeves. The name hit Jackson like a physical blow. Damon is involved? They're lovers, Wilson said bluntly. Have been for at least 18 months. Our surveillance shows them meeting at a hotel while you were in pre-deployment training. Jackson's mind reeled as he processed the betrayal. 18 months, half their marriage, had been a lie. The original plan appears to have been for Kozlov to stage a home invasion when you returned, Lambert continued. But something spooked them, possibly your friend Riley Dawson asking questions. They accelerated the timeline. Kozlov is en route to Iraq now, Wilson added, traveling under a journalist cover. His target is you, Wade. Admiral Garrison leaned forward. This gives us an opportunity, son, a chance to turn this around on them. How? Jackson asked, his voice hollow. We let them believe they've succeeded, Lambert explained. We fake your death, feed the information through channels Kozlov would use to confirm a hit. Then we watch to see what your wife and Reeves do next. And if they collect the insurance? Jackson asked. We'll have them for fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, and treason. You are, after all, an active duty SEAL with classified knowledge, Wilson said. They'll never see daylight again. Jackson stared at the wall, seeing not the bland beige paint, but images of Veronica laughing with him on their wedding day, helping him pack for deployment, whispering, "Come back to me. I need to make a call," he said finally. 10 minutes later, Riley Dawson was on a secure line. "Tell me everything you found," Jackson said without preamble. Riley's voice was tight with anger. "After you left, they got sloppy. Meeting at your house when they thought no one was watching. I placed surveillance equipment like we used in Kandahar. And they're planning to use your life insurance to start a luxury resort development in Costa Rica. Rees has been embezzling from his clients for years, but he's running out of funds to cover it up. Your death is their ticket to freedom." "How did you not get caught?" Jackson asked. "Veronica thinks I deployed to Africa with another team," Riley explained. "I've been working with NCIS for 2 months building the case." Jackson closed his eyes, fighting the rage and grief threatening to overwhelm him. "I want it on the plan," he told the agents when he returned. "And I want my team involved." "This is highly irregular," Lambert began. "So is my wife hiring a hitman?" Jackson countered. "This is personal now." Admiral Garrison studied him. "Can you separate your emotions from a mission?" Jackson met his gaze. "I've spent my career compartmentalizing, sir, as you once advised me to do." The Admiral held his eyes for a long moment, then nodded. "The plan needs to be flawless. The slightest mistake could alert them." Over the next 72 hours, they devised Operation Resurrection. Naval intelligence identified Kozlov's entry point into Iraq and his planned approach. A trap was set at a forward outpost where Jackson would supposedly be conducting a routine inspection. "We take Kozlov alive," Jackson insisted during planning. "I want him to give up everyone involved." The day arrived with the dry heat that signaled approaching summer. Jackson entered the outpost alone, visible through windows to any observer on the nearby ridgeline. At precisely 1,437 hours, a shot cracked through the air, shattering the window beside him. Jackson dropped his plan while a specialized team moved to intercept the shooter. 3 minutes later, they had Viktor Kozlov in custody, a high-powered rifle with his fingerprints as evidence. "Impressive response time," the Russian commented dryly as they zip-tied his hands. "Almost as if you were expecting me. Your reputation preceded you," Jackson said, stepping into the room. Kozlov's eyes widened. "This is unexpected. For both of us," Jackson replied. "Now we're going to have a conversation about who hired you." 3 hours of intense interrogation yielded the complete picture. Veronica had initiated contact through Damon, who had gambling debts to organized crime figures in Las Vegas. Those connections led to Kozlov. The payment was structured: $50,000 up front, $150,000 upon confirmation. She was very specific, Kozlov explained, attempting to bargain for leniency. It needed to look like insurgent activity, nothing that would trigger investigation. "And if I refused to cooperate?" Agent Lambert asked, playing his role in the deception. Kozlov shrugged. "There was a backup plan. Something about medicine in your food upon return." Your wife was determined. The official story was crafted carefully. Lieutenant Commander Jackson Wade died in a mortar attack on a forward operating base in Anbar province. His body, severely damaged in the blast, was being returned for a closed-casket funeral. As Jackson watched the news report of his own death from a secure location on base, Admiral Garrison placed a hand on his shoulder. "You ready for what comes next, son?" Jackson nodded, his eyes never leaving the screen where a photo of Veronica showed her receiving the news, her face a perfect mask of grief. "I was born ready," he said quietly, "and now I'm reborn." Chapter 3: The Ghost Observer. Death had changed Jackson Wade. As he stood on American soil 5 days after his reported killing, he was officially a ghost, a phantom moving through a world that believed him gone. Naval intelligence had transformed him with subtle but effective alterations. Hair dyed gray at the temples, colored contacts changing his blue eyes to brown, a carefully crafted prosthetic that slightly altered his jawline. "You're Thomas Barrett now," Agent Lambert explained, handing him credentials and a detailed background file. "Military contractor, security specialist, recently returned from private work overseas." They established him in an apartment overlooking the San Diego Bay, close enough to monitor developments, but not so close that anyone from his former life might recognize him. A specialized team from NCIS maintained constant surveillance on Veronica and Damon. "Your friend, Riley, wants in," Lambert said one evening, 3 days before Jackson's funeral was scheduled. "Absolutely not," Jackson replied immediately. "The fewer people who know I'm alive, the better. He's more valuable continuing to play his role." The morning of the funeral dawned with uncanny perfect weather, bright sunshine and a gentle breeze off the Pacific. Jackson watched from a distance as mourners gathered at Fort Rosecrans National Cemetery. The ceremony would be closed casket, an empty coffin bearing the weight of a nation's flag, but not his body. Through high-powered binoculars, he observed the tableau. Veronica dressed impeccably in black, her face hidden behind a veil as she accepted condolences. Admiral Garrison delivering a stirring eulogy about sacrifice and honor. Riley standing at rigid attention with the other SEALs, face carved from stone. Most revealing was who stood slightly apart. Damon Reeves, maintaining a respectful distance while occasionally glancing at Veronica. To most, he appeared to be a supportive friend. To Jackson's trained eye, he was a predator barely containing his triumph. Funeral attendance was impressive, Lambert noted, reviewing surveillance photos later. Half the SEAL command structure, 2 congressmen, even that movie star you saved in that yacht hijacking off Somalia. Jackson barely heard him, focusing instead on images of Veronica accepting the folded flag, her gloved hands clutching it to her chest in a gesture that would appear heartbreaking to anyone who didn't know the truth. "She's good," he murmured. "Really good." "Psychopaths often are," Lambert replied. "The insurance company has fast-tracked her claim due to your service status. She should receive payment within the week." Jackson nodded absently, studying another photo, this one of Luis Valenzuela, who had flown in from Iraq for the funeral. Something in his teammate's expression caught his attention. A slight tension around the eyes, a searching quality to his gaze as he scanned the crowd. "Has Luis been acting strangely?" Jackson asked suddenly. Lambert shrugged. "Not that we've noticed." "What?" "Just wondering," Jackson replied, making a mental note to watch his friend more closely. Luis had exceptional instincts. The days following the funeral revealed Veronica's true nature with startling clarity. Within 48 hours, she had begun liquidating assets, listing their home with a real estate agent, transferring funds to offshore accounts, selling Jackson's cherished classic car for a fraction of its value. "She's not even pretending to grieve in private," noted Agent Wilson, reviewing surveillance footage of Veronica laughing over champagne with Damon in the home she had shared with Jackson. Jackson watched the footage with detached interest, as if observing strangers rather than the woman he had loved and the man who had betrayed his trust. The passionate rage he had felt in Iraq had crystallized into something colder and more focused. The insurance company confirmed payment, Lambert announced 3 days later. $2 million deposited directly to her account this morning. "And," Jackson prompted. She immediately transferred $1 million to an account in Panama. The receiving entity is a shell corporation established by Reeves 6 months ago. Jackson nodded. "So it begins." The next morning brought news that Veronica had booked passage on the Odyssey, a luxury yacht available for private charter. The manifest listed her and Damon for a 3-day cruise along the California coast. "They're celebrating," Jackson said, reviewing the reservation details. "Or fleeing," Wilson suggested. International waters would be the first step toward disappearing completely. Jackson shook his head. "No, they wouldn't leave without the proceeds from the house sale. This is a victory lap." He turned to Lambert, a plan already forming. "I think it's time Thomas Barrett introduced himself." Admiral Garrison was brought into the expanding operation. "You realize this goes beyond standard procedure," he reminded Jackson during a secure call. "If you expose yourself now, we lose the advantage of surprise." "With respect, sir, I'm not proposing we end the operation. Just accelerate it," Jackson replied. "They're getting ready to disappear. We need to move before they liquidate everything." After a long pause, the Admiral sighed. "Your team has been asking questions. Riley is maintaining cover, but Luis is becoming persistent. Jackson had expected this. Luis always had the best instincts among us. Can he be trusted with this? Garrison asked. With my life, Jackson replied without hesitation. And more importantly, with a mission. 24 hours later, Luis Valenzuela entered a nondescript hotel room to find a supposedly dead commanding officer very much alive. His reaction moved from shock to rage to understanding in the space of 3 minutes. "You son of a bitch," he said finally, embracing Jackson fiercely. "I knew something wasn't right at that funeral. The casket weight was wrong." Jackson raised an eyebrow. "You checked the weight of my casket?" Luis shrugged. "I noticed things. So what's the play?" As Jackson outlined Operation Resurrection, Luis's expression hardened. "I want in, not just surveillance. I want to be there when she realizes you're alive." "That's exactly why I contacted you," Jackson replied. "I need people I can trust absolutely for what comes next." The plan crystallized over the next 12 hours. The Odyssey would depart from Marina del Rey the following evening. Jackson, Luis, and a select team would intercept the yacht once it reached a predetermined point offshore, far enough for privacy, but within U.S. territorial waters. "We do this by the book," Lambert insisted during the final briefing. "Evidence gathering is the priority. No matter how personal this is, we need a clean case." Jackson nodded, but a coldness had settled in his eyes, a look his teammates recognized from missions where survival hung in the balance. "Clean case," he echoed. "Absolutely." As night fell over San Diego, Jackson stood on the balcony of his temporary apartment, watching lights twinkle across the bay. Tomorrow, Veronica and Damon would board the Odyssey believing they had succeeded, that they had literally gotten away with murder. They would sip champagne and make plans for their blood money, never suspecting that the man they had tried to kill was planning their downfall. Jackson touched the wedding ring he still wore on a chain around his neck. Not as a symbol of love now, but as a reminder of betrayal and the price it would command. Resurrection Day is coming, he whispered to the darkness. And with it, judgment. Chapter 4, Dead Man Walking. The Odyssey gleamed under the California sunset, 65 feet of nautical luxury designed for the ultra-wealthy. From his position on a nearby Coast Guard vessel disguised as a fishing boat, Jackson watched through high-powered binoculars as Veronica and Damon boarded at Marina del Rey. Target Alpha and Beta have embarked, Luis confirmed through their secure communication channel. For crew members visible. No unexpected guests. Jackson nodded, studying his wife through the lenses. Veronica wore a flowing white sundress that caught the breeze, her hair loose around her shoulders. She looked radiant, carefree, not remotely like a grieving widow. Damon followed, carrying champagne and what appeared to be caviar. His designer clothes and confident stride spoke of a man who believed he had successfully navigated treacherous waters to claim his prize. "They've requested to anchor overnight near Catalina Island," reported Agent Wilson, who was monitoring communications. "Estimated arrival at the designated interception point is 2,200 hours. Jackson checked his watch. 4 hours until Resurrection Day. "Status on the team?" he asked. "Riley and tactical unit are in position on the secondary vessel," Luis replied. "Coast Guard official craft is standing by just over the horizon. Full legal jurisdiction confirmed." As darkness fell over the Pacific, Jackson prepared. He removed the disguising prosthetics, returning his face to its true form. He changed into the formal white naval uniform he had worn on his wedding day, a psychological detail Veronica would immediately recognize. "That's a bit theatrical, isn't it?" Lambert observed. "Psychological warfare," Jackson replied simply. "She tried to erase me. I want her to understand exactly who has returned." At 21:45, the Odyssey reached the designated coordinates and dropped anchor. Through night vision equipment, the surveillance team observed Veronica and Damon on the upper deck, drinking champagne under the stars. "All elements in position," Luis confirmed. "Ready on your mark." Jackson took a deep breath, centering himself as he had before countless missions. "Execute." The operation unfolded with SEAL precision. Two small, silent boats approached from opposite sides. Riley led one team, Luis the other. They boarded simultaneously, subduing the surprised crew without a sound. Within 90 seconds, they had control of the vessel without Veronica or Damon realizing anything was amiss. Bridge secure. Riley's voice came through the comm. Engine room secure. Targets still on upper deck, unaware. Jackson stepped onto the boarding craft. Bring me in. When he stepped aboard the Odyssey, a strange calm settled over him. He moved silently through the main cabin, ascending toward the upper deck where his faithless wife celebrated his death. He could hear their voices now, Veronica's laughter floating on the night air, Damon's lower tones responding. To new beginnings, Damon was saying, glasses clinking, and to leaving the past behind. I'll drink to that, Veronica replied. Though I have to admit, I'm surprised how easy it all was in the end. Jackson paused at the top of the stairs, just out of sight. Did you expect complications? Damon asked. With Jackson's friends, maybe. That Riley always seemed too observant. Military men, Damon scoffed. All muscle, no subtlety. Once they closed that casket, our problems were buried with him. Jackson gave the silent signal through his communicator. Instantly, spotlights blazed from the surrounding vessels, illuminating the yacht in harsh white light. He heard Veronica's startled cry, Damon's curse. What the hell? Damon demanded, shielding his eyes. Jackson stepped onto the deck, his white uniform glowing in the spotlights. Hello, Veronica, he said quietly. Surprised to see me? The color drained from her face. The champagne flute slipped from her fingers, shattering on the deck. This isn't possible, she whispered. You're dead. Resurrection Day, Jackson announced, his voice carrying across the suddenly silent yacht. As if on cue, Riley and Luis emerged from the shadows, weapons at the ready. Behind them came NCIS agents in tactical gear. Damon recovered first, lunging toward the railing as if contemplating a desperate dive into the dark water below. Riley intercepted him with casual efficiency, driving him to the deck with a knee in his back. Damon Reeves, Lambert announced, stepping forward, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, attempted murder of a federal officer, fraud, and treason. Veronica had not moved, her eyes fixed on Jackson as if seeing a ghost. Ow, she finally managed. Naval intelligence intercepted your hitman, Jackson replied evenly. Victor Kozlov sends his regards from federal custody. He was quite forthcoming about your arrangement. This is insane, she attempted, her shock giving way to calculation. Jackson, baby, whatever you think happened. Save it, he cut her off coldly. We have it all. The meetings with Kozlov, the money transfers, your conversations with Damon about how to spend your blood money. He stepped closer. I watched you at my funeral, Veronica. I watched you accept that flag over my empty casket. Something in his tone made her step back. For the first time, fear replaced shock in her eyes. Agent Lambert, Jackson said without breaking eye contact with his wife, please inform Mrs. Wade of her rights while she's being arrested for attempting to have her husband killed. As Lambert recited the Miranda rights, Jackson observed Veronica's transformation. The beautiful, loving woman he had married was gone, replaced by a calculating stranger whose eyes darted around seeking escape. You'll never make these charges stick, she hissed as handcuffs closed around her wrists. It's your word against mine. They'll see a disturbed soldier persecuting his faithful wife. Jackson smiled thinly. Actually, it's your word against yours. He nodded to Wilson, who held up a small device. We've been recording every conversation in our home for the past 3 months, including your detailed planning sessions with Damon. That's illegal, she sputtered. Inadmissible. Not when authorized as part of a national security investigation, Lambert interjected. Your husband's security clearance made this a matter of national security the moment you targeted him. As agents escorted Veronica and Damon to separate vessels, Jackson remained on the deck, staring out at the dark water. Riley approached, standing silently beside him. You good? Riley finally asked. Jackson considered the question. No, he admitted, but I will be. The Coast Guard cutter returned them to San Diego in the pre-dawn hours. As the city lights came into view, Admiral Garrison called. Phase 1 complete, Jackson reported. Suspects in custody. Good work, the Admiral replied. But we have a complication. The press got wind of an operation involving a resurrected SEAL. They're gathering at the dock. Jackson frowned. Ow, unknown at this time. But we need to control the narrative. Your death was public record. Your resurrection needs to be explained. By the time they docked, a small cluster of reporters had formed. Camera flashes erupted as Jackson descended to the pier, still in his white uniform. Lieutenant Commander Wade, called a reporter. Is it true you faked your death to catch your wife in an insurance fraud scheme? Were you ever actually deployed to Iraq? Shouted another. Lambert stepped forward. No questions at this time. This remains an active investigation. As they moved toward waiting vehicles, Jackson caught sight of a familiar face in the crowd. Veronica's father, Gerald Blackwood, watching with an unreadable expression. Their eyes met briefly before Jackson was ushered into a government SUV. That complicates things, Lambert noted, following his gaze. Blackwood has political connections. And money, Jackson added. This just got messy, eh? At NCIS headquarters, the initial interrogations began. Jackson watched through one-way glass as Lambert questioned Damon, who had already asked for a lawyer but seemed eager to mitigate his situation. It was her idea, Damon insisted. All of it. I was just helping with the financial aspects. Yet you're the one who made contact with Kozlov, Lambert pointed out. Under duress. She threatened to expose my... He trailed off. Your embezzlement from clients. Lambert supplied. We're aware of your financial difficulties, Mr. Reeves. In the adjacent interrogation room, Veronica maintained ice-cold composure, refusing to speak without her attorney present. When Gerald Blackwood's high-powered lawyer arrived 2 hours later, the dynamic shifted. My client has been subjected to an elaborate entrapment scheme, the attorney announced. Lieutenant Commander Wade clearly orchestrated this entire scenario to frame Mrs. Wade for financial gain. Jackson watched the legal maneuvering with growing concern. They're trying to flip the script, he observed to Admiral Garrison, who had joined him. Expected, the Admiral replied. Blackwood won't let his daughter go down without a fight, regardless of her guilt. How solid is our case legally? Jackson asked. Solid, but not bulletproof, Lambert admitted, joining them. The surveillance was authorized through national security channels, but their lawyer will challenge that classification. And Kozlov is negotiating for reduced charges in exchange for testimony. Jackson felt a cold certainty settle over him. They're going to try to walk. Not if I can help it, Garrison stated firmly. I've already briefed the Secretary of the Navy. This goes beyond a domestic murder plot. It's an attack on naval intelligence. As dawn broke over San Diego, Jackson found himself officially resurrected in government records. His death certificate was amended, his status restored to active duty. The cover story released to the press described a classified operation that required him to appear deceased. The public version omits your wife's involvement, explained a Navy public affairs officer. Simply states that your death was incorrectly reported due to operational security concerns. Jackson nodded, understanding the strategy. Keep the criminal case clean by separating it from military operations. By midday, the story had exploded across media channels. Jackson Wade, the SEAL who returned from the dead. Speculation ran rampant, with theories ranging from heroic undercover operations to government conspiracies. You're trending, Riley informed him, showing his phone screen. Terrific, Jackson replied dryly. As the day progressed, the legal battle lines formed more clearly. Veronica and Damon were arraigned separately, both pleading not guilty. Bail was denied for both despite vehement arguments from their attorneys. Flight risk, the judge stated simply, noting the evidence of offshore accounts and travel arrangements. Jackson returned to temporary quarters on the naval base, unable to return to the home he had shared with Veronica. As he settled into the austere room, his phone rang, an unknown number. Wade, he answered cautiously. You should have stayed dead, came Gerald Blackwood's cold voice. This vendetta against my daughter will cost you everything. Your daughter tried to have me killed, Jackson replied evenly. Allegations. Circumstantial evidence. The rambling of a Russian criminal seeking leniency. Blackwood dismissed. What the public will see is a disturbed soldier who couldn't handle his wife moving on after his reported death. A man who abused military resources for a personal grudge. Is that the story you're selling? Jackson asked. It's the story that will be believed, Blackwood replied. I've already spoken with 3 senators on the Armed Services Committee who find the military's involvement in this domestic matter deeply troubling. The threat was clear. Blackwood would use his political connections to reframe the narrative and pressure the military into distancing itself from Jackson. Your daughter will face justice, Jackson stated firmly. We'll see, Blackwood responded before hanging up. Jackson stared at the phone, then called Admiral Garrison to report the conversation. Expected, the Admiral sighed. Blackwood's already making waves. The media narrative is shifting. Questions about whether military resources were misappropriated for your personal vendetta. It wasn't a vendetta, Jackson objected. It was a legitimate counterintelligence operation. And I know that, Garrison agreed. But public perception can be manipulated. As night fell, Jackson sat alone in his quarters, reviewing case files Lambert had shared. The evidence seemed overwhelming to him. The payments to Kozlov, the recorded conversations, the insurance claim, the offshore accounts. Yet he understood enough about high-profile cases to know that evidence alone didn't guarantee conviction, not when money and power entered the equation. His phone buzzed with a text from Luis. Turn on the news. Jackson flipped on the television to see Veronica's father holding a press conference outside his Connecticut estate. My daughter is the victim of a vindictive campaign orchestrated by her husband, Blackwood was saying, his distinguished appearance lending credibility to his words. A man who, I might add, has spent years in classified operations where deception is standard practice. I ask the public to reserve judgment until all facts emerge. Jackson switched off the TV, a deep unease settling in his gut. The battle was shifting from evidence to narrative, from fact to perception. And in that arena, the Blackwoods of the world had distinct advantages. They're coming for your credibility, Riley observed when he arrived at Jackson's quarters an hour later. Let them try, Jackson replied, but his voice lacked conviction. Riley studied his friend carefully. What's the play here, boss? Legal channels look increasingly complicated. Jackson met his gaze. We stick to the plan, truth and justice. But as Riley left, Jackson found himself wondering if truth and justice would be enough against the forces aligning against him. Gerald Blackwood had made one thing abundantly clear. This was no longer just about bringing Veronica and Damon to justice. It had become a war for Jackson's reputation, career, and future. As he prepared for sleep, Jackson removed the wedding ring from around his neck, studying it in the dim light. Then, with deliberate movements, he placed it in an envelope, sealed it, and wrote a single word across the front. Evidence. The ghost had returned to the living world, but now faced the possibility that resurrection might carry its own form of damnation. Chapter 5. Countering the Counterattack. Jackson woke before dawn, his SEAL training asserting itself despite the turmoil of the previous day. He completed a punishing workout routine in the base gym, finding clarity in physical exertion as he always had. By 0700, he was showered and reviewing case developments with Lambert and Wilson at NCIS headquarters. The news wasn't encouraging. Blackwood has hired a PR firm specializing in crisis management, Wilson reported. They're pushing a narrative that you orchestrated an elaborate scheme to frame your wife after discovering her relationship with Reeves. Their theory is that you couldn't handle the rejection, so you used military resources to fake your death and set her up, Lambert added. They're suggesting your classified operations history makes you both deceptive and potentially unstable. Jackson absorbed this with grim silence. Character assassination was a predictable tactic, but knowing that didn't lessen its impact. What about Kozlov? He asked. His testimony demolishes their narrative. Lambert shifted uncomfortably. There's been a development. Kozlov was attacked in detention this morning. He's in critical condition. The implication hung in the air. Someone with serious connections had reached inside a federal detention facility. Blackwood, Jackson asked. No proof of that, Wilson cautioned. But the timing is suspicious. As they spoke, Admiral Garrison entered the room, his expression grave. We have another problem. The Secretary of the Navy is facing pressure from the Senate Armed Services Committee. They're questioning the allocation of military intelligence resources to what they're characterizing as a domestic dispute. This was attempted murder of a naval officer, Jackson objected. I know that, Garrison replied patiently. But the political optics are shifting. Blackwood has powerful friends. The admiral hesitated before continuing. They're considering a separate investigation into your conduct, specifically whether you misappropriated military resources for personal purposes. Jackson felt the walls closing in. Less than 24 hours after apprehending Veronica and Damon, the momentum was already shifting against him. What's our counter-strategy? He asked finally. We accelerate, Lambert decided. Push for immediate grand jury proceedings before Blackwood can further poison the well. Get testimony and evidence locked in while we can. And I need to make a public statement, Jackson added. Control my own narrative instead of letting them define me. Admiral Garrison nodded reluctantly. Normally I'd advise against it, but these aren't normal circumstances. Our public affairs office will help prepare you. As they strategized, Riley arrived with Luis, both in civilian clothes, but carrying themselves with military bearing. We've been monitoring chatter among Blackwood's associates, Riley reported. He's called in favors from everyone from banking executives to retired politicians. The man's building an army. And we got intel that Veronica's attorney is trying to get the case moved to Connecticut, where Blackwood's influence is strongest, Luis added. Jackson processed this, his tactical mind shifting to countermeasures. We need to solidify our support base too. Admiral, can you reach out to your contacts in Washington? Not for interference, just to ensure fair proceedings. Already in motion, Garrison confirmed. And I've authorized limited release of information confirming the legitimate counterintelligence aspects of the operation. By mid-morning, Jackson faced a carefully selected group of reporters for a brief statement. Dressed in his formal uniform with visible service medals, he projected the image of the dedicated officer, not the vengeful husband. I stand before you today to address the circumstances of my reported death and subsequent reappearance, he began, his voice steady. While I cannot disclose classified details, I can confirm that my seeming death was part of a legitimate counterintelligence operation authorized at the highest levels after credible threats against my life were detected. He paused, making eye contact with key reporters. These threats were connected to my active duty status and access to classified information, making them a matter of national security. I regret that personal relationships became entangled in this operation, but I categorically deny manipulating or misusing military resources for personal vendettas. The statement was brief but effective. By emphasizing the national security aspects while acknowledging personal elements, Jackson hoped to shift perception back toward the core truth. He had been targeted because of his military position. As the day progressed, the battle lines hardened. Veronica's legal team filed motions challenging the admissibility of surveillance evidence. Damon's attorneys proposed a deal, his testimony against Veronica in exchange for reduced charges. They're turning on each other, Lambert observed with satisfaction. Don't celebrate yet, Wilson cautioned. Reeves turning state's witness could actually help Veronica by making him seem less credible, a desperate man saying anything to save himself. By evening, Gerald Blackwood had escalated his campaign, appearing on a national news program to portray his daughter as a victim of military overreach. My daughter believed her husband dead, as did everyone, he told the sympathetic interviewer. Any actions she took after his reported death were those of a widow moving forward with her life. To criminalize her subsequent relationship and financial decisions is not just cruel, it's un-American. When asked about the alleged murder plot, Blackwood dismissed it entirely. These allegations originate from a single source, a foreign national with a criminal record who was apprehended under suspicious circumstances. The entire narrative was constructed to justify what amounts to an elaborate sting operation against my daughter. Jackson watched the interview with Riley and Luis in his temporary quarters, his jaw tight. He's good, Riley admitted reluctantly. Very convincing. And strategic, Luis added. Notice he never directly accuses you or the military of misconduct, just implies it. Keeps himself legally protected. The court of public opinion doesn't require evidence beyond reasonable doubt, Jackson observed. Just reasonable suspicion. As they spoke, Jackson's phone rang. Agent Lambert with troubling news. Kozlov died 30 minutes ago without regaining consciousness, he reported grimly. Cause of death appears to be a cerebral hemorrhage from the attack, but we're treating it as suspicious until proven otherwise. Jackson felt a cold weight settle in his stomach. Their key witness was gone, eliminating the most direct evidence of Veronica's murder plot. This changes the landscape, Lambert continued. Without Kozlov's testimony, we're more dependent on the surveillance evidence, which they're already challenging procedurally. After the call ended, Jackson sat in silence, processing the implications. The case against Veronica and Damon remained strong, but was no longer airtight. With enough legal maneuvering and public relations spin, they might create sufficient doubt to escape justice. We need to change tactics, Jackson decided finally. They're fighting this on multiple fronts, legal, political, public opinion. We need to do the same. What's the play? Riley asked. Divide and conquer, Jackson replied. Damon's already showing willingness to turn on Veronica. Let's exploit that, give him an opening, see what else he might reveal. The following morning brought another development. Veronica had given an exclusive jailhouse interview to a sympathetic journalist, portraying herself as a grieving widow who had sought comfort with a friend after her husband's death, only to be blindsided by his vindictive return. I mourned him, she was quoted saying. I buried him. Then to have him reappear and accuse me of trying to kill him? It's beyond traumatic. It's psychological torture. The article mentioned nothing about the insurance money, offshore accounts, or recorded conversations planning Jackson's death. Instead, it painted a portrait of a devoted military wife whose life had been shattered twice. First by her husband's reported death, then by his accusations. Admiral Garrison called an emergency strategy meeting at NCIS headquarters. The narrative is slipping away from us, he stated bluntly. We need to regain control. We have one advantage they don't, Jackson pointed out. The truth. Truth requires evidence that can withstand legal scrutiny, Lambert reminded him. With Kozlov dead, we've lost our star witness. Then we find new evidence, Jackson insisted. Damon's financial records could provide the paper trail connecting him to Kozlov. And Veronica's computer might contain communications we haven't yet discovered. Wilson nodded slowly. We obtained warrants for their electronic devices during the arrests. The forensic team is still processing them. Expedite it, Garrison ordered, and add more resources if needed. As the meeting concluded, a junior agent entered with an unexpected development. Sir, there's someone here asking to speak with Lieutenant Commander Wade. Says it's regarding the Kozlov connection. The visitor turned out to be Natasha Petrov, a slender woman with wary eyes who identified herself as Viktor Kozlov's sister. Viktor called me the night before he died, she explained once they were settled in an interview room. He knew he was in danger. He told me if anything happened to him, I should find you. Jackson exchanged glances with Lambert. Did he tell you who threatened him? Not directly, she replied. But he mentioned the old man with political connections was reaching out through intermediaries. She hesitated. Viktor also said he had insurance, evidence he kept separate from what the authorities found. What kind of evidence? Lambert asked intently. A recording, Natasha revealed. He always recorded his business meetings. Something about trust issues. She produced a small flash drive from her purse. He told me where to find this. Said it would burn them all if necessary. The recording, once authenticated by NCS technical experts, proved explosive. It captured a meeting between Kozlov, Damon, and Veronica 3 months before Jackson's deployment, discussing not just the planned killing but contingencies if the initial attempt failed. If he somehow survives Iraq, we move to Plan B. Veronica could be heard saying clearly, The toxin is untraceable. I'll have full access once he's home recovering. Most damning was her explicit mention of the insurance policy and their plans for the money. $2 million is just the beginning, she explained to Kozlov. Once we're established in Costa Rica, we can leverage his military connections for consulting contracts. Dead or alive, he's our ticket to freedom. As the recording played, Jackson felt a strange detachment, as if listening to strangers discussing someone else's murder. The calculated coldness in Veronica's voice made her seem like a different person entirely from the woman he had married. "This changes everything," Lambert declared when the recording ended. "Between this and the surveillance we already had, their case is collapsing." Assuming it's admissible, Wilson cautioned. Chain of custody could be an issue. "It's enough to prevent them from controlling the narrative," Jackson pointed out. Once this becomes public, Blackwood's spin campaign falls apart. The next 48 hours saw a dramatic shift in momentum. While the legal teams debated the admissibility of Kozlov's recording, carefully selected portions were leaked to the press, not by official channels, but through Natasha Petrov, who had her own reasons for wanting justice. The public reaction was immediate and overwhelming. Veronica's portrayal as a victim crumbled in the face of her recorded words discussing her husband's murder. Gerald Blackwood abruptly canceled scheduled media appearances, retreating to his Connecticut estate without comment. Sensing the changing winds, Damon Reeves' attorney approached prosecution with a comprehensive plea deal offer. In exchange for reduced charges, Damon would provide complete testimony about the conspiracy, including Gerald Blackwood's knowledge of the plot. Blackwood knew. Jackson asked incredulously when Lambert reported this development. According to Reeves, Blackwood didn't authorize the hit, but knew about their relationship and the insurance scheme, Lambert explained. He advised them on avoiding detection and promised legal support if necessary. This revelation added another dimension to the case, explaining Blackwood's aggressive counter-campaign as self-protection rather than merely paternal concern. By the week's end, the prosecution's position had strengthened considerably. The judge denied the motion to transfer the case to Connecticut, ensuring it would remain in federal court in San Diego. Forensic examination of Veronica's devices revealed encrypted communications with both Damon and Kozlov, providing additional evidence of premeditation. Most significantly, Natasha Petrov's revelation about her brother's death had triggered an internal investigation at the detention facility, uncovering a guard who had been paid to facilitate the attack on Kozlov. The money trail led back to an associate of Gerald Blackwood. "They're crumbling," Riley observed during a strategy session at Jackson's temporary quarters. "Turning on each other. That was always inevitable," Jackson replied. "People like Veronica and Damon only form alliances of convenience, not loyalty." As the case against Veronica and Damon solidified, Jackson faced another battle, regaining his professional standing after the public spectacle of his resurrection. While the military officially supported him, whispers of impropriety lingered in some quarters. Admiral Garrison addressed this directly during a private meeting at his office. "The Secretary of the Navy has reviewed the complete operation file," he informed Jackson. His conclusion is that while unorthodox, our actions were justified under the circumstances. Your status and security clearance are fully reinstated." Jackson nodded gratefully, and the Senate committee inquiries quietly discontinued. Garrison replied with a slight smile. Amazing how quickly political interest fades when evidence of corruption emerges. Several senators who were pressing the issue had received campaign contributions from Blackwood Enterprises. By the 10th day after the yacht confrontation, the public narrative had completely reversed. Veronica and Damon were no longer portrayed as victims of military overreach, but as calculating conspirators who had nearly succeeded in a cold-blooded murder for financial gain. Gerald Blackwood's reputation lay in tatters, his business empire facing shareholder revolts and regulatory scrutiny. In a final, desperate maneuver, Veronica's attorney approached prosecution with a plea offer of her own, one that Jackson found himself reviewing with Lambert and Wilson late one evening. She's offering to plead guilty to conspiracy and fraud charges in exchange for dropping the attempted murder and treason counts, Lambert explained. 15 years instead of potential life imprisonment. And she wants her father excluded from any charges related to the case, Wilson added. Jackson considered the offer carefully. The pragmatic side of him recognized its value, a guaranteed conviction without the risks of trial. Yet something felt unresolved. What's your recommendation? He asked Lambert. From a prosecutorial standpoint, it's solid. Guaranteed conviction, significant sentence, no risk of appeal complications. Jackson nodded slowly. And yet, it doesn't feel like justice. Lambert completed the thought. I understand that. But perfect justice is rarely achieved in our system. After a long silence, Jackson made his decision. Accept the plea on one condition. I want a face-to-face meeting with Veronica before she's sentenced. No lawyers, no recordings. Lambert raised an eyebrow. That's highly irregular. So, is having your wife try to kill you? Jackson countered. I need closure, not just conviction. After consultation with the prosecution team, the unusual request was granted. 3 days later, Jackson entered a small conference room at the Federal Detention Center where Veronica awaited in prison attire, her glamour dimmed but not extinguished. They sat across from each other, studied each other in silence. Jackson searched her face for traces of the woman he had loved, finding instead a stranger wearing familiar features. Why? He asked simply. The question that had haunted him since Iraq. Veronica held his gaze. Does it matter now? It does to me. She seemed to consider whether honesty served her interests, then shrugged slightly. I married you for stability and status. The handsome seal with promising career prospects. But your deployments meant freedom I grew to crave permanently. And Damon, a means to an end, initially, she admitted. He had financial skills I needed. The relationship developed from mutual opportunity. You could have simply divorced me, Jackson pointed out. Veronica's laugh held no warmth. And get what? A standard settlement? The life insurance was exponentially more valuable than divorce would provide. Besides, her eyes narrowed slightly. You wouldn't have let go easily. The conversation continued for 30 minutes, Jackson extracting what closure he could from her calculated responses. She showed no genuine remorse, only regret at being caught. When they rose to end the meeting, Veronica offered one parting shot. You know what's ironic, Jackson? In trying to kill you, I made you more alive than you'd been in years. I've never seen such fire in your eyes before. As guards led her away, Jackson realized she was partially right. The betrayal had burned away his naivety, leaving something harder but also clearer in its place. Outside the detention center, Riley waited by a government vehicle. Get what you needed? He asked as Jackson emerged. Jackson considered the question. Not what I wanted, but perhaps what I needed. As they drove away, Jackson caught a final glimpse of the facility in the side mirror, a concrete reminder of where trust without verification had led him. The war for justice had been won, but at the cost of innocence he would never reclaim. Where to now, boss? Riley asked. Forward, Jackson replied simply. Always forward. Chapter 6. Ashes and Embers. 3 months after Veronica's guilty plea, Jackson stood on the balcony of his new apartment overlooking San Diego Bay. The air carried a hint of autumn, tempering the California sunshine. Behind him, the sparse furnishings reflected his transitional state, a man between worlds, rebuilding. His phone buzzed with a text from Admiral Garrison. Senate confirmation complete. Promotion approved. Jackson allowed himself a small smile. His new role as commander with expanded responsibilities in naval intelligence represented professional vindication after months of scrutiny. The military had ultimately recognized that his actions during Operation Resurrection demonstrated exceptional judgment under extraordinary circumstances. Not everyone had fared so well in the aftermath. Damon Reeves was serving 12 years for his role in the conspiracy. Veronica had received 15 years under her plea agreement, though her attorneys continued filing appeals on procedural grounds. Gerald Blackwood had avoided criminal charges but faced SEC investigations into financial improprieties discovered during the case investigation. His once formidable influence had crumbled under the weight of scandal. "You decent?" "I brought lunch," called Riley's voice from the front door. Jackson welcomed his friend, noting the civilian clothes and relaxed demeanor that signified Riley's recent transition to private security work. "How's civilian life treating you?" Jackson asked as they settled with sandwiches on the balcony. "Pays better. Hours are predictable," Riley shrugged. "Miss the purpose sometimes." They ate in companionable silence before Riley broached the subject they'd been dancing around. "Heard you've been offered command of a new counterintelligence task force." "Taking it." Jackson nodded. "Report next month." "It's a good fit, leveraging what we learned from this mess to protect others. And personally, you ready to move forward on that front too?" The question hung in the air. Since Veronica's sentencing, Jackson had immersed himself in work, avoiding the deeper personal reckonings that awaited. "One step at a time," he replied eventually. "The divorce is final. The house sold last week." Riley nodded toward a stack of mail on the counter. "Still getting her mail?" "Final stragglers. Some people didn't get the memo about her new address at federal prison." As if on cue, Jackson's phone rang, Agent Lambert calling with unexpected news. "We've got a situation," Lambert began without preamble. "Veronica attempted suicide in custody last night." Jackson felt a complex surge of emotions: concern, anger, confusion. "Is she?" "She'll recover." But during treatment, they found something concerning. A detailed journal hidden in her cell, describing plans for when she gets out. Lambert paused. "She's still fixated on you, Wade, and not in a healthy way." "Revenge fantasies?" Jackson asked, unsurprised. "More elaborated than that. Detailed enough that her psychiatric evaluation has been expedited. But that's not why I'm calling." Another pause. In her belongings, they found correspondence with someone outside. Someone still actively communicating with her. "Blackwood?" "No. Someone who signed only as the messenger." "The letters contain information about your current activities, your new apartment, your routines." Jackson felt a chill that had nothing to do with the breeze off the bay. "Someone's been watching me." "Appears so. We're investigating, but I wanted you aware immediately." After ending the call, Jackson briefed Riley, whose expression darkened. "The conspiracy was wider than we thought," Riley concluded. "Someone else involved who never surfaced during the investigation. Or someone with a different agenda entirely," Jackson suggested. Using Veronica as a convenient proxy, the revelation cast a shadow over Jackson's carefully reconstructed world. The enemy he thought defeated might have been merely one head of a larger hydra. Over the next several days, NCIS established enhanced security protocols around Jackson while investigating the mysterious correspondent. Analysis of the letters revealed professional surveillance techniques, detailed observations that suggested military or intelligence background. "This isn't a jealous boyfriend or angry relative," Lambert concluded during a briefing. "Whoever's watching you has training." Despite the threat, Jackson refused to alter his schedule dramatically. "If someone's watching, let them watch," he reasoned. Creating patterns might draw them out. A breakthrough came unexpectedly through Luis Valenzuela, who had been redeployed with a SEAL team, but maintained connections to the investigation. "Something's been bothering me about the timeline," Luis explained during a secure call. "Remember that training exercise 2 weeks before your Iraq deployment? The one where communications went dark for 6 hours." Jackson remembered. It had been an unusual glitch during routine exercises. "I'll pull the logs," Luis continued. "The communications officer that day was a last-minute replacement, a guy named Calvin Turner who transferred out immediately afterward." And Jackson prompted, "He doesn't exist. Or rather, the real Calvin Turner died 5 years earlier. Someone used his identity to access our communications that day." The implications were disturbing. Someone had infiltrated secure military communications shortly before Jackson's deployment, perhaps intercepting information about his Iraq assignment that later enabled the assassination attempt. Further investigation revealed that Calvin Turner had entered the base using credentials that traced back to a defense contractor with overseas operations. The company, Global Defense Solutions, had connections to international arms dealers and private military contractors. This goes beyond Veronica and Damon, Admiral Garrison concluded when presented with the evidence. Someone targeted you specifically, possibly due to operations you conducted. Jackson reviewed his mission history, focusing on operations that might have created powerful enemies. One name surfaced repeatedly in his analysis: Viktor Dragunov, a Russian arms dealer whose operation Jackson's team had disrupted in the Baltic region 3 years earlier. Dragunov had lost millions, and his brother had been killed during the raid. Dragunov swore vengeance, Riley recalled, but intelligence indicated he'd been neutralized by his own people after the failure. What if that intelligence was wrong? Jackson suggested. What if he went underground, rebuilding resources to exact personal revenge? The theory gained credibility when forensic analysis matched partial fingerprints from one of the prison letters to an associate of Dragunov known to have operated in the United States. This changes the calculus entirely, Lambert observed during an emergency strategy session. If Dragunov manipulated Veronica and Damon as proxies for his revenge scheme, they may have been unknowing pawns. Don't oversimplify, Jackson cautioned. Veronica and Damon made their own choices, but they may have been nudged in a particular direction by someone with resources and patience. As they pieced together this expanded conspiracy, Jackson realized that his resurrection had disrupted not just Veronica's plans, but potentially a years-long revenge operation orchestrated by Dragunov. If we're right, he won't stop, Admiral Garrison warned. He'll adapt and try again. The assessment proved accurate sooner than expected. 3 days later, Jackson's apartment building was evacuated due to a suspicious package. Bomb disposal units found an advanced explosive device designed to appear as a routine mail delivery. Professional work, reported the bomb technician. Military-grade components, sophisticated trigger mechanism. That evening, Jackson met with Admiral Garrison, Lambert, Riley, and a select team to develop countermeasures. We have 2 options, Garrison outlined: defensive or offensive. We either harden security around you indefinitely, or we draw out and neutralize the threat. I vote offensive, Riley stated immediately. Jackson can't live in a bubble forever. Agreed, Jackson affirmed. If Dragunov wants me, let's give him an opportunity, on our terms. Operation Shadowcatcher took shape over the next 72 hours. The plan was elegant in its simplicity: create the appearance of vulnerability while establishing an elaborate surveillance and capture framework. We leak information about your medical treatment for PTSD, Lambert explained. Suggest you're struggling with the aftermath of Veronica's betrayal. Make you appear isolated and vulnerable. Meanwhile, we monitor every approach vector, Riley continued. Physical surveillance, electronic monitoring, undercover assets and positions to identify surveillance teams. The operation launched with a carefully planted news story about Jackson's supposed emotional struggles following his traumatic experiences. His security detail was visibly reduced, while actually being replaced by undercover operatives. Jackson established a predictable routine: regular visits to a therapist's office, actually a secured command post, evening runs along predictable routes, weekly dinners alone at a local restaurant with minimal security presence. For 2 weeks, nothing happened. Then sensors detected sophisticated electronic probing of Jackson's new security systems. Someone was testing his defenses. They're preparing, Lambert confirmed, gathering intelligence for an approach. On the 18th day of the operation, facial recognition software identified a known Dragunov associate conducting surveillance from a cafe across from Jackson's therapist's office. Rather than apprehending him immediately, they allowed him to report back, tracking his communications to a hotel outside the city. We've got a concentration of suspicious activity at the Marina Bay Hotel, reported the surveillance coordinator. Multiple subjects with Eastern European profiles, unusual equipment deliveries. Admiral Garrison authorized the next phase: accelerated provocation. Jackson began appearing even more vulnerable, apparently drinking heavily at his regular restaurant, stumbling slightly during his evening runs, projecting the image of a man unraveling. The trap was set. 3 days later, Jackson sat alone at his usual table in the restaurant, nursing a glass of water that appeared to be vodka. Through concealed earpieces, he maintained contact with the operation team. Subject entering from the north entrance came Riley's voice. Black jacket, gray shirt, moving toward your section. Jackson continued his performance of slight intoxication, apparently unaware of his surroundings. When a man in the black jacket seated himself at the adjacent table, Jackson barely glanced up. "Good evening, Commander Wade," the man said in lightly accented English. "Mind if I join you?" "Free country," Jackson slurred slightly, playing his role. The man smiled thinly. "Is it? I find freedom is often an illusion. Like your freedom from your wife's conspiracy." Jackson allowed genuine surprise to show on his face. "What do you know about that?" "More than you might expect," the man replied, leaning forward. "For instance, I know that while you believed you were hunting the predator, you were actually the prey all along." "Who are you?" Jackson demanded, dropping the pretense of intoxication. "A messenger," came the reply, echoing the signature from the prison letters. "From someone who admires your resilience, but believes your time has run its course." "Dragunov," Jackson stated flatly. The man's slight widening of eyes confirmed the guess. "You are well informed. That makes this conversation more interesting." "Tell your boss I'm not easy to kill," Jackson said, voice hardening. "Better men than him have tried." "Oh, he's counting on your skill," the messenger replied smoothly. "It makes the game worthwhile. But everyone has vulnerabilities, Commander. Even you." As he spoke, the man reached slowly into his jacket. Jackson tensed, but instead of a weapon, he extracted a photograph, one showing Riley entering his apartment building the previous day. "Your loyal friend," the messenger observed. "Your teammate Luis, currently deployed in Eastern Europe. Admiral Garrison, whose granddaughter attends St. Catherine's Elementary. We know all your connections, Commander." The threat was unmistakable. Jackson felt cold rage building behind his practiced calm. "You've made a serious miscalculation," he replied evenly. "Have I?" The messenger seemed amused. "Yes. You assumed I came alone." On that signal, the operation unfolded. Riley and two operatives materialized from different sections of the restaurant. Simultaneously, tactical teams moved on the Marina Bay Hotel, capturing Dragunov's support team before they could react. The messenger's face registered genuine shock as he was efficiently restrained. "This changes nothing," he hissed. "Dragunov's reach extends beyond what you can imagine." "Maybe," Jackson acknowledged, standing to his full height. "But he made a fundamental error targeting me and threatening my people. He ensured I would never stop until he's neutralized." The coordinated operation yielded significant intelligence about Dragunov's network, including communication protocols that helped track him to a compound in Eastern Europe. Within 48 hours, a joint Interpol-NATO operation captured the arms dealer as he attempted to flee to a non-extradition country. In the after-action briefing, Admiral Garrison summarized the expanded understanding of the conspiracy that had nearly claimed Jackson's life. Dragunov identified Veronica as manipulable during a charity event 3 years ago, one where she attended as your wife while you were deployed. He cultivated her slowly through intermediaries, eventually introducing her to Damon Reeves, who was already compromised through gambling debts to Dragunov's associates. "They groomed them both," Lambert added. "Encouraged the affair, suggested the insurance scheme, connected them with Kozlov, all while maintaining enough distance that if the plot failed, it couldn't be traced back to him." Jackson absorbed this information with mixed emotions. It didn't excuse Veronica's betrayal, but contextualized it within a more complex web of manipulation and opportunity. And the final communication with Veronica in prison, he asked. "Dragunov keeping a potential asset engaged," Wilson explained, "promising assistance with appeals in exchange for information she could gather about you during legal proceedings." The unraveling of this larger conspiracy brought resolution to questions that had lingered after Veronica's conviction. The expanded understanding allowed Jackson to finally contextualize the betrayal not just as personal failure, but as part of a sophisticated operation targeting him for his military service. 2 weeks after Dragunov's capture, Jackson received formal orders for his new command assignment, leading a specialized unit focused on identifying and countering similar threats against military personnel. The position leveraged his unique experience while transforming personal trauma into institutional knowledge that could protect others. On his final evening in San Diego before reporting to his new assignment, Jackson hosted a small gathering at his apartment. Riley, Luis, briefly back from deployment, Admiral Garrison, and the key NCIS agents who had supported him through the ordeal. As they shared drinks on the balcony overlooking the bay, Admiral Garrison raised a toast. To resurrection, he offered. Not just of life, but of purpose. Jackson raised his glass, meeting each person's eyes in turn. These were his true family now, forged through crisis rather than ceremony or certificates. Later, after the others had departed, Riley remained behind to help clean up. "You know what I realized today?" Riley asked as they worked. "This apartment, it's the first place you've lived that's truly yours. Not your and Veronica's, not temporary quarters. Yours." Jackson considered this. "True, though I'm leaving it for the new assignment. Still, it's a start." Riley hesitated before adding, "You ever miss her? The woman you thought she was?" Jackson paused, giving the question its due weight. "Sometimes I miss the illusion," he admitted. "The comfort of believing in something that seemed whole and true." He shrugged slightly. "But I'd rather have painful truth than comfortable lies." As night settled over the bay, Jackson contemplated the journey from betrayal to resurrection. The path had been brutal, exposing vulnerabilities he hadn't known existed while revealing strengths he hadn't recognized. The man who had trusted blindly was gone, replaced by someone more cautious but also more authentic. "First light tomorrow?" Riley asked, referring to their planned run before Jackson's departure. "First light," Jackson confirmed. It seemed fitting, beginning his next chapter as dawn broke over the horizon. The ashes of his former life had yielded unexpected embers of renewal, and from those embers, a new fire was kindling. Chapter 7. Crucible of Truth. 1 year after dismantling Dragunov's network, Commander Jackson Wade stood before a classified briefing room at the Pentagon, presenting findings from his specialized counterintelligence unit. Operation Safeguard had identified 17 potential targeting operations against military personnel with access to sensitive information, 3 of which had progressed to active recruitment of the target's family members. "The tradecraft is evolving," Jackson explained to the gathered intelligence leaders. "Foreign actors are moving beyond traditional espionage methods to leverage personal relationships, financial vulnerabilities, and psychological manipulation." Admiral Garrison, now Deputy Director of Naval Intelligence, nodded in agreement. "Commander Wade's team has pioneered protocols that identified these threats before they materialized. The preventative approach is proving more effective than reactive measures." The briefing concluded with approval for expanded operations and increased resources. As attendees filed out, Jackson gathered his materials, mentally shifting focus to his next commitment, the final hearing regarding Veronica's latest appeal. "You don't have to attend, you know," remarked Catherine Russo, the Department of Justice prosecutor who had handled the case since Lambert's promotion to a different division. "Your written statement is sufficient." Jackson appreciated her concern, but shook his head. "I need to see this through personally." The past year had brought significant changes. After successfully establishing his new unit, Jackson had gradually rebuilt a life beyond the shadow of betrayal. Professional success came naturally, but personal reconstruction proved more challenging. He maintained close bonds with Riley, Luis, and his former SEAL teammates while cautiously developing new connections. Dr. Elaine Mercer, a counterterrorism analyst who collaborated with his unit, had gradually evolved from colleague to friend to something potentially more significant. Their shared understanding of operational security and the complexities of intelligence work provided common ground, while their contrasting perspectives, his practical field experience balancing her theoretical expertise, created stimulating interaction. "Still plan to make dinner?" Elaine texted as Jackson left the Pentagon. "Should be done by 6. Appeal hearing is at 3, he replied. "Good luck. Remember what we discussed. Closure isn't necessarily confrontation. Jackson smiled slightly at her gentle reminder. Elaine understood his tendency to seek definitive resolution in all situations, a trait that served him well operationally, but sometimes complicated personal matters. At the federal courthouse, Jackson took a seat in the back row of the gallery, observing without drawing attention. Veronica's appearance shocked him despite mental preparation. Prison had hardened her physically while seeming to intensify rather than diminish her self-assurance. She sat beside her attorney with perfect posture, occasionally scanning the courtroom with calculating eyes. When their gazes inevitably met, Jackson detected multiple emotions flitting across her features: surprise, anger, and something harder to define. Not remorse, certainly, but perhaps recognition, acknowledgement of the culmination of their shared journey. The proceedings moved efficiently. Veronica's appeal cited alleged procedural errors and challenged evidence admissibility, but the three-judge panel seemed unpersuaded by her attorney's arguments. When the chief judge announced their decision to uphold the original conviction and sentencing, Veronica showed no visible reaction beyond a slight tightening of her jaw. As court officers prepared to escort her back to detention, Veronica suddenly turned, looking directly at Jackson. "It was real at first," she called across the courtroom. "Whatever else you believe, that part was real." Before he could respond, she was led away. Jackson remained seated as the courtroom emptied, processing her parting statement. Was it truth, manipulation, or some complex fusion of both? The uncertainty embodied their entire relationship. Outside the courthouse, Jackson was surprised to find Gerald Blackwood waiting on a nearby bench, significantly aged from when they had last encountered each other. The scandal surrounding his daughter's case had decimated his business empire and social standing. Though he had avoided criminal charges, civil litigation had claimed most of his fortune. "Commander," Blackwood acknowledged, rising stiffly. "A moment of your time." Jackson approached cautiously. "Mr. Blackwood, I'm dying," the older man stated without preamble. "Pancreatic cancer. 6 months at most." Jackson maintained neutral expression, uncertain where this was heading. "I'm sorry to hear that. I didn't come for sympathy." Blackwood gestured to a manila envelope on the bench. "I came to give you that. Information about Veronica that you deserve to know." "What kind of information?" Jackson asked, making no move toward the envelope. "Her history, medical and psychological records from before she met you. Things I concealed to protect our family reputation." Blackwood's expression held genuine regret. "Things that might have prevented this tragedy had you known them." "Why now?" Jackson questioned, suspicion evident. "Because dying focuses priorities remarkably well," Blackwood replied with unexpected candor. "I failed my daughter by hiding her true nature instead of helping her address it. I failed you by allowing the marriage when I suspected it was doomed. These are burdens I choose not to carry into whatever awaits me." Jackson studied the man's face, seeing beyond the practiced facade to genuine deterioration. Whatever Blackwood's motivations, his declining health appeared genuine. "I appreciate the gesture," Jackson said finally, taking the envelope. "But I've made my peace with most of this." Blackwood nodded slowly. "Perhaps, but understanding sometimes brings closure that justice alone cannot provide." As Blackwood walked away, Jackson resisted the urge to immediately examine the contents. Instead, he secured the envelope in his briefcase and continued with his planned day, refusing to allow Veronica to once again disrupt his carefully constructed equilibrium. That evening, after an enjoyable dinner with Elaine, where conversation focused on current projects rather than past complications, Jackson finally opened Blackwood's envelope in the privacy of his apartment. The contents proved both disturbing and illuminating. Medical records showed Veronica had been diagnosed with antisocial personality disorder at 17 following a disturbing incident involving a romantic rival. Psychiatric evaluations documented a pattern of manipulative behavior, superficial charm, and lack of genuine empathy, all carefully managed through therapy and medication until she turned 22. At that point, she had apparently rejected further treatment, and Gerald Blackwood had used influence and resources to keep her condition private, managing situations when her behavior threatened to expose her true nature. Most revealing was a personal journal from her college years that documented her approach to relationships. "People are assets to be cultivated or liabilities to be managed," she had written. "The secret is making them believe they're chosen for themselves when really they're selected for their utility." As Jackson processed these revelations, he recognized they changed nothing about what had happened, yet somehow altered his perception of it. Veronica's betrayal hadn't been merely opportunistic. It had been inevitable given her fundamental nature. The woman he thought he had married had been a carefully constructed facade from the beginning. The following morning, Jackson shared the information with Dr. Elaine Mercer over coffee before work, valuing her professional insight. "This explains patterns, but doesn't excuse actions," Elaine observed after reviewing the documents. "Many people with similar diagnoses never harm others." "True," Jackson acknowledged, "but it helps me understand why traditional signs of deception never registered." She wasn't simply lying. She was playing a character so thoroughly she almost believed it herself. "Does it change how you feel about what happened?" Elaine asked carefully. Jackson considered the question. "It shifts the narrative from personal failure to recognized betrayal to something more like encountering a natural force. You don't blame yourself for not predicting a hurricane." Later that week, Jackson met with Admiral Garrison to share the information, given its potential relevance to security protocols his unit was developing. "This validates your emphasis on psychological profiling of family members for high-clearance personnel," Garrison noted. "The traditional background check would never have flagged these issues since Blackwood sanitized the records. It also suggests we need better monitoring systems for behavioral changes during relationships," Jackson added. "Not invasive surveillance, but awareness training for personnel themselves." The revelations about Veronica's psychological profile informed refinements to Jackson's counterintelligence programs, transforming personal trauma into institutional safeguards that might prevent similar betrayals for others. 3 months after the failed appeal, Jackson received notification that Veronica had been transferred to a different federal facility following an incident with another inmate. The details were sparse, but reading between the lines suggested she had manipulated a staff member, resulting in security concerns. "She'll never stop being who she is," Riley observed when Jackson mentioned the transfer during their weekly training session. "Some people can't change their nature." "Maybe not," Jackson agreed. "But understanding her nature helped me change mine." This perspective reflected Jackson's evolving philosophy. While early after his resurrection, he had focused on justice and consequences, his outlook had gradually shifted toward prevention and understanding. The expanded context provided by Blackwood's revelations had accelerated this evolution. 6 months later, Gerald Blackwood's obituary appeared in national newspapers. A surprisingly modest farewell for a man who had once commanded significant influence. Jackson attended the funeral discreetly, observing from a distance as a small gathering paid respects. Veronica was notably absent, having been denied temporary release to attend. As Jackson turned to leave the cemetery, he noticed a familiar figure watching from beneath a distant tree. Damon Reeves, recently released on parole after serving part of a sentence. Their eyes met briefly across the carefully maintained grounds, acknowledgement passing between them without words. Two men who had occupied different positions in Veronica's elaborate performance, each paying distinct prices for their roles. That evening, Jackson received an unexpected package delivered to his secure office address. A single leather-bound journal with a brief note from Gerald Blackwood's attorney, found among his effects. Instructions were to deliver to you upon his death. The journal contained Blackwood's private reflections during the investigation and trial of his daughter. What began as defiant denial gradually transformed into reluctant recognition of painful truth. The final entries showed a man wrestling with his role in creating the circumstances that led to tragedy. "I gave her everything except boundaries," one passage read. "I protected her from consequences until she believed they didn't apply to her. In trying to be her salvation, I became her damnation. The journal provided final confirmation that Blackwood had not orchestrated the conspiracy, but had enabled it through years of protecting Veronica from the repercussions of her actions. His final act, sharing her records with Jackson, represented belated acceptance of responsibility. 2 years to the day after Operation Resurrection culminated on the Odyssey, Jackson's unit received intelligence about a potential new threat. This one targeting Dr. Elaine Mercer due to her access to classified counterterrorism analyses. The source appeared to be a hostile intelligence service using methods disturbingly similar to those Dragunov had employed against Jackson. "They're adapting our own techniques," Jackson observed during the emergency briefing, "using what worked against me as a template for new operations." The threat against Elaine created both professional and personal urgency. Their relationship had developed gradually but significantly over the preceding months, building on mutual respect and shared values rather than the intoxicating but ultimately hollow connection he had experienced with Veronica. "We have an advantage they don't anticipate," Jackson told his team as they developed countermeasures. "They're targeting Elaine to get us sensitive information, but they don't realize she's connected to the unit specifically designed to detect these operations." The ensuing counterintelligence operation demonstrated how completely Jackson had transformed his traumatic experience into operational expertise. Within 3 weeks, his team identified and neutralized the threat network, capturing key operatives while feeding disinformation that compromised the hostile service's broader operations. "You've created something extraordinary here," Admiral Garrison commented during the after-action review. "A capability that didn't exist before your experience with Veronica. Crucibles either break you or forge you stronger," Jackson replied. "I chose forging." That evening, celebrating the successful operation with Elaine in her apartment, Jackson found himself reflecting on the journey from betrayal to his current life. "Something amusing?" Elaine asked, noticing his slight smile. "Just thinking about unintended consequences," he explained. "If Veronica hadn't betrayed me, I would never have developed this unit. Dozens of operations would have succeeded against their targets, including this one against you." "The universe works in strange patterns," Elaine agreed. "Though I imagine you trade the professional success to have avoided the personal pain." Jackson considered this seriously. 2 years ago, absolutely. Now, he shook his head. "I'm not sure I would. The man I was then wasn't equipped for the work I do now, or for a relationship built on genuine understanding rather than idealized projection." As they talked into the night, Jackson recognized how completely his perspective had evolved. The betrayal that once defined him had become merely one significant chapter in a continuing story, influential but no longer all-encompassing. The crucible had indeed forged him stronger, not despite the pain, but because of how he had metabolized it into wisdom. The next morning brought news that further closed the circle of his past. Natasha Petrov, Viktor Kozlov's sister who had provided crucial evidence, contacted NCIS with information about previously unknown aspects of the conspiracy. Her brother had maintained additional records that she had only recently discovered. Communications suggesting Dragunov's operation against Jackson had been part of a larger campaign targeting multiple special operations personnel. This intelligence proved vital to Jackson's unit, enabling them to identify and warn 3 other potential targets. The continuing ripples from his personal experience reinforced Jackson's conviction that even the darkest chapters could yield unexpected light if properly processed. When Luis Valenzuela returned from his latest deployment, he joined Jackson, Riley, and Elaine for dinner, completing the circle of those who had been present since the beginning of the ordeal. To resurrection, Luis proposed as a toast, echoing Admiral Garrison's word from a year earlier. Not just surviving, but becoming something stronger. Jackson raised his glass, meeting each person's eyes in turn. And a transformation, finding purpose in pain. As conversation flowed around him, Jackson reflected on the distance traveled from that moment in Iraq when his world had shattered. The crucible had indeed transformed him, burning away illusions while forging deeper understanding. Not merely resurrected, but fundamentally reborn, He had constructed a life with greater authenticity and purpose than what had been lost. The betrayal remained a scar, but scars told stories of healing, not just injury. And in that healing lay his most profound victory, not over Veronica, but over the limitations of his former self. Chapter 8. Resurrection Complete. 3 years after Operation Resurrection, Commander Jackson Wade stood before an incoming class of intelligence officers at the Naval Academy, concluding his guest lecture on counterintelligence vulnerabilities. The most dangerous threats aren't the ones that attack our systems, he emphasized, but those that exploit our human connections. Technical defenses can be engineered to near perfection. Human relationships require different safeguards: awareness, communication, and healthy skepticism balanced with trust. A young ensign raised her hand. Sir, how do you maintain that balance between necessary skepticism and destructive paranoia? The question struck at the heart of Jackson's personal journey. Verification isn't distrust, he replied carefully. It's respect for reality. Trust should be calibrated to evidence, not emotion. The most dangerous words in security aren't "I don't trust you," they're "I trust you completely." After the lecture, Admiral Garrison joined Jackson for lunch at the Officers Club, their quarterly tradition since Jackson's promotion to full commander. Still getting invitations to write your memoir? Garrison asked with a knowing smile. Jackson laughed. 3 more publishers last month alone. Apparently, the SEAL who returned from the dead remains marketable. You should consider it, Garrison suggested, not for the first time. Your experience could help others. The lessons are being shared through the program, Jackson countered, without the sensationalism a public account would require. Their conversation shifted to upcoming operations and intelligence developments, the easy rapport of longtime colleagues evident in their interaction. As they prepared to depart, Garrison handed Jackson a sealed folder. New intelligence on our old friend Dragunov, he explained. Seems his network is attempting to reconstitute under new leadership. Your team should be briefed. Jackson accepted the folder with a nod. We'll integrate it into current monitoring protocols. The continued threads connecting to his past no longer surprised Jackson. The echoes of Operation Resurrection persisted in unexpected ways, each instance reinforcing the wisdom gained through that crucible. Later that afternoon, Jackson returned to the converted brownstone in Alexandria that housed his specialized unit. The building's unremarkable exterior concealed state-of-the-art security and communications equipment, allowing his team to monitor potential targeting operations against military personnel worldwide. Package arrived for you, announced Riley, who had transitioned from private security work to become Jackson's deputy when a unit expanded. Cleared through all security protocols. The unmarked box contained a single item, a vintage compass with a note from Luis Valenzuela, currently deployed with his SEAL team in classified operations, something to keep you oriented when waters get choppy. Happy birthday, brother. Jackson smiled at his friend's remembrance. His birthday was still 2 weeks away, but Luis would be unreachable by then. The gesture reflected the deepened bonds forged through shared adversity, relationships that had proven more genuine than his marriage ever was. That evening, Jackson met Elaine for dinner at their favorite riverside restaurant. Their relationship had evolved naturally over the preceding years, building on professional respect that gradually incorporated personal connection. Unlike his whirlwind courtship with Veronica, this relationship had developed with deliberate pace and mutual consideration. Garrison mentioned the Dragunov network is showing signs of activity, Jackson mentioned as they enjoyed after-dinner drinks on the restaurant's terrace. Elaine nodded. My division picked up related chatter last week. They're recruiting new talent, but capabilities remain limited. Their easy exchange of professional information reflected their unique compatibility. 2 people whose work involved classified matters, yet who could share substantively without compromising security. This transparency stood in stark contrast to Jackson's compartmentalized relationship with Veronica. Still planning to join me this weekend at Riley's Lake House? Elaine asked as conversation shifted to personal matters. Looking forward to it, Jackson confirmed. 3 days without operations, intelligence reports, or security protocols sounds perfect. Their comfortable interaction was interrupted by Jackson's secure phone vibrating with a priority message from his operations center. Priority alert. Wade J. Call secure line immediately. Jackson excused himself to make the call from a private location, concern evident in his expression. Commander Wade. He identified himself when connected. Sir, we've received notification that Veronica Wade attempted escape during medical transport, reported his duty officer. Currently unaccounted for. Last known position was approximately 50 miles west of her detention facility. Jackson felt an unexpected chill despite the warm evening. When, approximately 4 hours ago, Marshal Service just released the alert through secure channels due to your connection and potential risk. Initiate elevated security protocols for all primary team members, Jackson ordered. I'll report to the operations center within 30 minutes. Returning to the table, Jackson found Elaine already settling the check, having recognized his expression. Work emergency? She asked simply. Veronica escaped custody, he explained quietly. Details limited at this point. Elaine nodded, professional focus immediately replacing relaxed enjoyment. I'll coordinate with my section for any intelligence support you might need. Their seamless transition from personal to operational mode exemplified their compatibility, each understanding the demands of the other's responsibilities without resentment or drama. At the operations center, Jackson's team had already assembled, implementing enhanced security measures while gathering information about the escape. The details proved concerning. During transport to a medical specialist, Veronica's convoy had been ambushed by well-trained operatives. 2 U.S. Marshals were wounded, and Veronica had disappeared with the attackers. Surveillance footage from a gas station 2 miles from the ambush site reported Jackson's intelligence analyst displaying grainy images on the main screen. Facial recognition confirms Veronica entering this black SUV. License plate, Jackson asked, stolen from a vehicle in Richmond 3 days ago. Further analysis revealed disturbing connections. The tactical approach used in the ambush-matched methodologies associated with former associates of Viktor Dragunov. This isn't coincidental, Riley observed, studying the assault pattern diagrams. The timing aligns with the intelligence about Dragunov's network reactivating. They're using her knowledge of you, suggested another analyst. She spent years observing your patterns, habits, techniques. Jackson absorbed this assessment with professional detachment, refusing to allow emotional history to cloud his analysis. Veronica would have limited current value as an intelligence asset. My patterns and procedures have evolved significantly since her imprisonment. Unless they're not after intelligence, Riley countered. What if this is about completing what they started 4 years ago? Psychological warfare, using your ex-wife as the weapon. This perspective aligned with Jackson's instinctive assessment. Veronica's escape wasn't merely an incidental connection to his past. It represented deliberate targeting designed to unsettle him personally and professionally. Establish communication with all relevant agencies, Jackson directed. Marshal Service, FBI, and appropriate military counterintelligence units. Full information sharing under joint operation protocols. Over the next 72 hours, Jackson coordinated an intensive effort to track Veronica and her liberators. The investigation revealed a concerning pattern: systematic probing of security systems protecting key members of Jackson's original team, including Riley, Luis, and Admiral Garrison. They're conducting preliminary surveillance for potential strikes, assessed the FBI liaison officer assigned to the case. Classic preparation for targeted operations. But they made no attempt to remain covert about Veronica's escape, Jackson pointed out. Almost as if they wanted us to know she was free. This contradiction suggested psychological manipulation rather than straight operational objectives. The message seemed clear. Veronica was once again a weapon aimed at Jackson's life, not just physically but emotionally and professionally. On the 4th day after the escape, the anticipated contact came through an unexpected channel. During routine security monitoring, Jackson's technical team detected an intrusion attempt against his home network, not seeking to remain hidden, but deliberately triggering security alerts. They left this embedded in the attempted breach, reported the cybersecurity specialist, displaying a video file. The recording showed Veronica seated in a nondescript location, appearing composed and determined. "Hello, Jackson," she began, her voice steady. "I imagine you're coordinating quite the manhunt by now. Always the efficient operator." She smiled slightly before continuing. "I wanted you to know that my release wasn't my idea, but I certainly embraced the opportunity. These new associates of mine have interesting perspectives on our shared history, particularly how it connects to broader operations against American intelligence assets." The implied threat was clear, though Veronica maintained plausible deniability in her wording. "They've proposed a meeting, you and me, discussing old times and new possibilities. Terms to be provided separately." The video concluded with Veronica leaning toward the camera. "Resurrection works both ways, darling. You came back from the dead. Now so have I." Jackson maintained impassive expression as the video ended, but inside, complex emotions churned. Not fear or distress, but recognition of a critical juncture requiring perfect clarity. "They're using her as bait," observed Agent Wilson, who had rejoined the investigation representing FBI interests. "Attempting to draw you into a vulnerable position." Obviously, Jackson agreed. "But declining engagement cedes initiative to them. We need to control the battlefield, not avoid it." The team developed a comprehensive strategy that balanced legitimate investigation with psychological countermeasures. Rather than responding directly to the provocation, they intensified efforts to track Dragunov's reconstituted network while establishing enhanced protection for potential targets. "Make it clear we're hunting the organization, not fixated on Veronica," Jackson directed. "She's expecting me to make this personal. Disappointing that expectation is our first countermove." 3 days later, intensified intelligence operations identified a property in rural Virginia potentially connected to Veronica's escape team. Satellite imagery showed increased activity consistent with an operational staging area. "Perfect opportunity for reconnaissance," Riley suggested during planning. "Small team, minimum footprint, maximum intelligence gathering." Jackson nodded agreement, but made a crucial decision. "I'm removing myself from the field component. You'll lead the reconnaissance team." Riley raised an eyebrow in surprise. "You're sitting this one out?" "They're expecting me to personally pursue Veronica," Jackson explained. "That expectation creates a blind spot we can exploit. They'll be watching for my approach patterns, not yours." The strategic self-removal represented Jackson's complete evolution from the man who had once insisted on personal involvement in every aspect of Operation Resurrection. He now recognized that professional distance sometimes provided tactical advantage, especially when opponents attempted to leverage personal history. The reconnaissance operation succeeded beyond expectations. Riley's team not only confirmed the location as an operational base, but identified 3 key members of Dragunov's reconstituted network. Most significantly, they discovered Veronica was no longer at the site, having been moved to another location 24 hours earlier. "They're compartmentalizing her," Jackson observed when reviewing the intelligence, "treating her as a high-value asset rather than a partner." This assessment proved crucial to understanding the true dynamics. Veronica wasn't directing this operation. She was being utilized as a psychological weapon by Dragunov's successors, valued for her connection to Jackson rather than her own capabilities. With this insight, Jackson restructured the investigation approach. Rather than treating Veronica as the primary target, they focused on the organizational structure supporting her, identifying financial transfers, communication patterns, and logistical support networks. This approach yielded results when analysis identified patterns connecting 3 apparently separate business entities, all linked to a former associate of Dragunov named Mikhail Volkov, who had assumed leadership of the fragmented network. Volkov is attempting to rebuild Dragunov's operation using personal vendettas as organizing principles, explained the intelligence analyst presenting the findings. Targeting you isn't just about revenge. It's about establishing credibility with former clients and associates. Understanding this broader context allowed Jackson to develop a comprehensive counter-strategy that addressed both immediate threats and longer-term security implications. The approach balanced offensive operations against Volkov's network with defensive measures protecting potential targets. 7 days after Veronica's escape, the anticipated second communication arrived, this time through official channels. A letter delivered to NCS headquarters contained specific coordinates for a proposed meeting, along with elaborate security protocols designed to ensure Jackson would come alone. Classic ambush setup, Riley observed during the analysis session. They're not even being subtle about it, which suggests they don't expect us to interpret it as an ambush, Jackson countered. They're assuming we'll recognize the obvious trap and develop elaborate countermeasures, which they'll be prepared for. This insight led to an unconventional response strategy. Rather than either accepting the meeting terms or rejecting them entirely, Jackson authorized a third approach, apparent compliance that concealed strategic manipulation. We'll respond as if we're reluctantly agreeing while implementing standard protective protocols, he explained to the joint agency team. Meanwhile, we'll be executing the actual operation against their command structure. While appearing to focus resources on securing the proposed meeting location, Jackson's team coordinated simultaneous raids against 3 identified nodes in Volkov's network: financial operations, communications hubs, and logistical support centers. The synchronized strikes deliberately avoided the meeting location, targeting instead the infrastructure that would monitor and support the planned ambush. Cut off the head, and another grows back, Jackson told his planning team. Cut off the support system, and the head withers. The operation launched, striking multiple targets across 3 states while maintaining the appearance of focused preparation for the proposed meeting. By the time Volkov's operatives realized their support infrastructure was being systematically dismantled, critical systems and personnel were already compromised. Jackson monitored operations from the secure command center, maintaining strategic oversight while tactical teams executed the coordinated strikes. The approach represented his fully evolved leadership philosophy, leveraging his personal experience and insights while recognizing when direct involvement would compromise rather than enhance effectiveness. 4 hours into the operation, intelligence channels lit up with emergency communications from Volkov's fragmented network. The coordinated assault had created cascading failures across their organization, forcing hasty relocations and exposing previously concealed assets. We've got movement at the secondary site identified during reconnaissance, reported the surveillance coordinator. Multiple vehicles departing in apparent evacuation. Satellite imagery confirmed that Veronica was among those being evacuated, transferred to an armored SUV under heavy security. Rather than directly intercepting this movement, Jackson's strategy allowed controlled monitoring, identifying additional network connections as emergency protocols activated. They're falling back to contingency locations, the intelligence analyst observed, tracking the dispersal pattern. But the disruption to their communications infrastructure means those movements aren't coordinated. This fragmentation created opportunity for the final phase of Jackson's strategy. With Volkov's network in disarray, targeted interdiction became viable with minimal collateral risk. FBI tactical teams intercepted 3 separate evacuation groups, including the convoy transporting Veronica. When the operation concluded 16 hours after initiation, Volkov was in custody along with 17 key network members. Most significantly, Veronica had been recaptured without a single casualty among the interdiction teams. In the after-action briefing, Admiral Garrison summarized the operation's significance. Beyond the immediate security outcomes, this operation demonstrated the evolution of our counterintelligence capabilities. Rather than reacting to personal targeting, we identified and neutralized the broader threat network. The Admiral's assessment reflected Jackson's transformed approach to threat response, seeing beyond immediate provocations to underlying strategic objectives. 3 days after the operation, Jackson visited the secure facility where Veronica was being held pending return to federal prison. Unlike their previous confrontation years earlier, this meeting served operational rather than personal purposes, debriefing her about Volkov's network and operations. When Jackson entered the interview room, Veronica studied him with evident surprise. "You look different," she observed. "Calmer somehow. Perspective changes people." Jackson replied simply, opening the case file rather than engaging with her attempt at personal connection. Throughout the 3-hour interview, Jackson maintained professional detachment, focusing on operational details rather than their shared history. Veronica's attempts to redirect conversation toward personal matters met polite but firm redirection. "They told me you were coming personally," she noted toward the end of the session. "I assumed that meant you still felt something, anger, hatred, something." Jackson considered this assessment. "Professional responsibility isn't personal fixation," he replied evenly. "Your escape and connection to Volkov's network required my involvement. Nothing more." "Nothing more," she repeated, studying his expression. "You really have changed. The Jackson I married would have moved heaven and earth to confront me himself, to make sure I understood he had one. That perspective was part of what made me vulnerable to manipulation," Jackson acknowledged. Seeing interactions as competitions to be won rather than situations to be managed effectively. As the interview concluded, Veronica attempted one final personal connection. "Do you ever wonder what might have been if circumstances had been different?" Jackson gathered his materials, meeting her gaze directly. "Circumstances weren't different. They were exactly what they were. I've learned to accept reality rather than dwelling on hypotheticals." This response, delivered without animosity but with absolute clarity, represented Jackson's completed transformation. The man who had once been consumed by betrayal now recognized it as merely one significant experience among many that had shaped his current self. The following week brought formal commendations from multiple agencies for the successful operation against Volkov's network. Beyond the immediate security benefits, the approach established new protocols for responding to personal targeting of intelligence personnel, protocols that would protect others from similar threats. During a private dinner celebrating the operation's success, Elaine presented Jackson with a small wrap package. "Something to mark the occasion," she explained. Inside, he found a compass remarkably similar to the one Louise had sent, but this one had been modified with a custom face. Where a traditional compass showed cardinal directions, this one displayed values: truth, purpose, connection, growth. "To help navigate whatever comes next," Elaine explained. "North isn't always where we expect to find it." Jackson recognized the profound symbolism. His journey from betrayal to resurrection had required recalibrating his entire orientation system, learning to navigate by different reference points than those he had previously trusted. "Perfect," he said simply, the word encompassing both the gift and the understanding behind it. Later that evening, as they walked along the Potomac, Jackson found himself reflecting on the complete arc of his transformation. The betrayal that had once defined his existence had been fully integrated into a more complex and authentic identity, informing his perspective without limiting it. "Something on your mind?" Elaine asked, noticing his thoughtful expression. "Completion," he replied. "This operation closed a circle that began 4 years ago. Not just tactically, but personally." "You think Veronica understands that?" Elaine asked. Jackson considered the question. "I'm not sure she's capable of understanding any perspective beyond tactical advantage. But her understanding isn't necessary for my resolution." This insight represented the final stage of Jackson's resurrection, recognition that closure didn't require reciprocal acknowledgement from those who had caused harm. True resurrection came from internal integration and purpose rather than external validation or vengeance. As they continued their walk under the soft glow of riverside lights, Jackson felt the weight of the past fully transformed into foundation for the future, not forgotten or minimized, but repurposed toward creation rather than reaction. 3 days later, Jackson received word that Veronica had been returned to maximum security with additional charges, ensuring she would remain incarcerated for decades. The system that had once seemed vulnerable to manipulation by wealth and influence had finally closed firmly around her. "Do you need to know the details of her sentencing?" Riley asked when delivering the news. Jackson considered this briefly. "No," he decided. "That chapter's closed." His response wasn't dismissive but reflected genuine completion. His well-being no longer connected to Veronica's fate. The resurrection was indeed complete. Chapter 9. Legacy of Resurrection. 5 years after the Volkov operation, Captain Jackson Wade stood on the deck of his Virginia home, watching the sunset paint the sky in brilliant orange and purple hues. The promotion to captain had come 18 months earlier. Recognition of his unit's expanded influence throughout military intelligence. "Beautiful evening," observed Elaine, now his wife of 2 years, as she joined him with glasses of wine. "Perfect for celebration." The day marked the official establishment of the Personal Targeting Prevention Program, the culmination of Jackson's work transforming his personal trauma into institutional wisdom. The program would protect military personnel and intelligence operatives from the type of targeting that had nearly destroyed him. "To legacy," Elaine offered, raising her glass. "Turning wounds into wisdom." Jackson smiled, clinking his glass against hers. "And to unexpected journeys. I never imagined betrayal would lead here." Their quiet celebration was interrupted by the arrival of familiar vehicles. Riley's rugged SUV, followed by Luis's motorcycle. Admiral Garrison, now approaching retirement, arrived moments later. These 3 men had been with Jackson from the beginning, witnesses to both his destruction and rebirth. "The band's back together," Riley announced as they gathered on the deck. "Seemed appropriate for today." Luis, now a senior chief with gray streaking his once dark hair, nodded agreement. Full circle moment. From Operation Resurrection to institutional doctrine. As they settled around the outdoor fireplace, Admiral Garrison raised his glass. "I've attended countless program launches in my career, but none with foundations as personal as this one." The conversation flowed easily among people bonded through crisis and purpose. They reminisced about the yacht confrontation, the courtroom battles, the intelligence operations that followed, not with bitterness, but with the perspective of distance and growth. "Remember when we thought it was just about a faithless wife and insurance money?" Luis mused. "Now look, international networks, structural reforms, whole new security protocols. That's how these things work," Jackson reflected. "What seems personal often connects to something larger. Our blind spots become entry points for threats beyond what we imagined." As night fell, the conversation shifted to current operations and future plans. Riley had recently been appointed to lead a specialized training division implementing Jackson's security protocols. Luis was considering retirement from active duty to join the program's International Liaison Office. The next generation needs to understand these vulnerabilities without experiencing them firsthand, Garrison observed. "That's the real legacy here, prevention rather than recovery." Later, after their guests had departed, Jackson and Elaine walked through their home, a place built with conscious intention rather than inherited assumptions. Unlike his house with Veronica, every element reflected genuine shared values rather than performative display. 10 years ago today, Jackson noted, checking the date on his watch. "The day I learned about Veronica's plan in Iraq." Elaine squeezed his hand gently. "Anniversary of sorts." "Rebirth day, maybe," he suggested. "The day illusion began dying so reality could emerge." This perspective, seeing catastrophe as catalyst, represented Jackson's completed transformation. The man who had once defined himself through military accomplishment and then through betrayal's aftermath now understood both as chapters in a continuing story rather than defining events. The following morning brought news that would test this perspective. A secure message from NCIS informed Jackson that Veronica had died in prison from complications following a routine medical procedure. The report was clinical, containing only essential details and notification protocols. Jackson sat with this information in his home office, surprised by his own reaction. Not satisfaction or relief, but a quiet acknowledgement of life's unpredictable patterns. The woman who had once been central to his existence had exited the world without fanfare or resolution. When Elaine found him there, she recognized something significant had occurred. "What is it?" she asked. "Veronica died yesterday," he replied simply. Elaine sat beside him, not offering platitudes, but presence. "How are you processing that?" Jackson considered the question carefully. "It feels separate from me, like news about someone from a different lifetime." "Is that uncomfortable?" she asked. "No," he realized. "It's actually confirmation. The cord was already cut long ago. This just formalizes it." Jackson declined the prison's offer to claim personal effects, suggesting they be donated to appropriate charities instead. This decision wasn't about rejection, but recognition. Those objects belonged to a story that had concluded years earlier. 3 weeks later, Jackson received an unexpected visitor at his Pentagon office, Thomas Blackwood, Veronica's younger brother, whom Jackson had met only briefly during their courtship. Unlike his father and sister, Thomas had built a quiet life as a research physician, deliberately distant from family drama. "I found these while handling Veronica's affairs," Thomas explained, placing a small box on Jackson's desk. "Letters she wrote to you, but never sent." The prison psychologist apparently encouraged it as therapy. Jackson studied the sealed envelopes with measured interest. "Why bring them to me?" "Because understanding matters," Thomas replied. "Not for forgiveness or reconciliation. Those ships sailed long ago. But for completion." After Thomas departed, Jackson considered the unopened letters throughout his workday. They represented potential insight into Veronica's perspective, but also potential disruption to hard-won equilibrium. That evening, he discussed the letters with Elaine over dinner. "I'm uncertain about reading them," he admitted. "Not afraid, exactly, but cautious about reopening closed chapters." "What would be your purpose in reading them?" Elaine asked, offering perspective rather than direction. Jackson considered this. Completing the picture, perhaps. Understanding her evolution after capture, if any occurred. "And what would be your purpose in not reading them?" "Maintaining forward momentum. Acknowledging that some stories don't need additional chapters." Elaine nodded, understanding the complexity. "There's no wrong choice. Either serves a legitimate purpose." After careful consideration, Jackson decided to read the letters. Not from need, but from position of secure perspective. The 6 envelopes contain Veronica's evolution over years of incarceration, from initial rage and blame to gradual, incomplete recognition of her own pathology. The final letter, dated just months before her death, contained perhaps the closest thing to genuine insight she had achieved. "I've come to understand that what I called love was actually ownership. I selected you for attributes that serve my purposes, then resented you for having needs and perspectives beyond my design. Whether this flaw was born in me or created through my father's enabling hardly matters now. The truth remains that I never saw you, only the role I assigned you in my personal narrative." This acknowledgement, while far from true remorse, represented evolution Jackson hadn't expected, a glimmer of self-awareness from someone whose entire existence had been constructed around its absence. After reading the letters, Jackson placed them in a secure file rather than destroying them. They represented not emotional attachment, but historical documentation, evidence of how perspective could shift, however minimally, even in the most resistant mind. 6 months later, Jackson's unit faced its most significant test when a sophisticated network targeting multiple military intelligence officers was identified operating across 3 continents. The methodologies showed clear influences from both Dragunov's original approach and Volkov's adaptations, institutional knowledge being transferred through criminal networks. "They're learning from each failure," Jackson observed during the initial briefing, "adapting techniques based on our previous countermeasures." The evolving threat demonstrated the perpetual nature of security challenges, each solution creating parameters for new problems requiring innovative responses. Rather than finding this discouraging, Jackson recognized it as validation of his program's importance. "We build and they adapt. They advance and we counter," he told his team. "The cycle never ends, but each iteration protects more people." The international operation that followed represented the full maturation of approaches developed since Operation Resurrection. Multiple agencies coordinated seamless responses across jurisdictions, identifying vulnerabilities before they could be exploited and neutralizing threats before they materialized. When the operation concluded successfully 6 weeks later, Admiral Garrison, now in his final month before retirement, made a point of visiting Jackson's office. "You've created something remarkable," the Admiral observed, surveying the operations center. "A system that transforms potential victims into proactive defenders. Built on hard-earned lessons," Jackson acknowledged. "The best innovations usually are," Garrison replied. "Pain converted to purpose." As the Admiral prepared to leave, he paused at the door. "You know, when I pulled you into that trailer in Iraq to tell you about Veronica's plot, I had no idea where it would lead. I was just trying to save a good officer." Jackson smiled slightly. Life's defining moments rarely announce themselves when they arrive. "Too true," Garrison agreed. "Though I suspect your upcoming appointment might qualify as one announcing itself pretty clearly." The reference was to Jackson's pending nomination to Rear Admiral, a promotion that would expand his influence throughout the intelligence community and formally recognize the institutional value of his approach to counterintelligence. That weekend, Jackson and Elaine hosted a gathering at their home, not to celebrate his nomination, but to mark Riley's marriage to Catherine Chun, a cybersecurity specialist he had met during the Volkov operation. The event brought together the extended family of colleagues and friends who had supported Jackson's journey from betrayal to purpose. During a quiet moment, Louise pulled Jackson aside. "Remember what you told me, right after we caught Veronica on the yacht? When I asked if you were okay?" Jackson searched his memory. "I said I wasn't, but I would be." Louise nodded. "I've been thinking about that. Might be the most honest thing anyone's ever said during crisis. Not denial, not false bravado, just recognition that healing takes time. And work," Jackson added. "Healing is active, not passive. That's what I've always admired about you," Louise continued. "You never let circumstances define you, even when they tried their damnedest to do exactly that." As the celebration continued around them, Jackson found himself reflecting on the complete arc from that moment in Iraq when his world shattered to this gathering of authentic connections. The betrayal that once seemed to define his existence had become merely the catalyst for a more genuine and purposeful life. Later that evening, watching their friends depart, Elaine observed Jackson's contemplative expression. "Penny, for your thoughts?" "I was thinking about resurrection," he replied. "Not just survival, but transformation. Becoming something different than before." "Better?" she asked. "More authentic," he clarified. "Crisis strips away pretense. What rebuilds afterward has the potential for greater truth." This perspective represented Jackson Wade's completed journey, from the shock of betrayal through the crucible of resurrection to the legacy of transformation. The man who had once defined himself through external validation now anchored his identity in purpose and authentic connection. The betrayal that had once seemed an ending had ultimately opened doors to beginnings he could never have imagined. Professional impact extending beyond his individual career, personal relationships grounded in genuine understanding rather than performative affection, an internal peace that came from integration rather than compartmentalization. As nights settled over their home, Jackson recognized that resurrection was not a single event, but a continuing process, each day offering opportunities to transform experience into wisdom and challenges into purpose. The lessons written in pain had become guideposts for a life of meaning that transcended the betrayal that catalyzed it. In this recognition lay the final victory, not over Veronica or her conspirators, but over limitation itself. The death of illusion had enabled the birth of purpose, transforming personal catastrophe into legacy that would protect others long after the original wound had healed. Resurrection, in its fullest sense, was complete, not as return to previous existence, but as transformation into something both stronger and more authentic than what had been lost. The journey that began with betrayal had culminated in renewed purpose, demonstrating that even the darkest chapters could become foundation for unexpected light. Epilogue. 10 years after Operation Resurrection, Admiral Jackson Wade stood before the Naval Academy graduating class, delivering the commencement address. His distinguished career had included transforming military counterintelligence, establishing international security protocols, and mentoring a generation of officers trained to recognize and counter personal targeting. Your greatest vulnerability, he told the attentive graduates, will never be your technical knowledge or tactical skills. It will be your human connections, the places where duty meets emotion. This isn't weakness to be eliminated, but reality to be managed with wisdom and awareness. He paused, surveying the young faces before him. Some of life's most valuable lessons come through its most painful experiences. The difference between being defined by crisis and being refined by it lies in how you process what happens to you. Trauma can either become a prison or a pathway. The choice belongs to each of us. In the audience, Elaine watched with quiet pride, their twin daughters beside her. Riley and Louise sat nearby with their families, the bond formed through shared adversity having evolved in a lifelong friendship that extended to the next generation. After the ceremony, as they gathered for photographs, Riley nudged Jackson playfully. Not bad for a guy who was officially dead for a while. Jackson laughed, the sound genuine and unrestrained. Resurrection has its advantages. As the extended family moved toward waiting vehicles, Jackson glanced back at the academy grounds where his own journey had begun decades earlier. The path from that beginning to this moment had contained detours and obstacles he could never have anticipated. Betrayal that shattered his foundation, resurrection that transformed his purpose, and legacy that extended beyond his individual experience. The cycle of destruction and renewal had ultimately yielded something stronger and more authentic than what had initially existed, proving that endings, even the most painful ones, often contain the seeds of unexpected beginnings for those willing to transform experience into wisdom and trauma into purpose. In this transformation lay the true meaning of resurrection, not merely returning to life, but emerging with greater purpose and authenticity than before. The death of illusion had enabled the birth of wisdom, creating legacy that would continue long after the pain that catalyzed it had faded into distant memory. Turning toward his waiting family, Jackson moved forward, not defined by his past, but informed by it, carrying the lessons of resurrection not as burden, but as light illuminating the path ahead. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.